You guys know I am not the biggest fan of SUVs. Alternatively, you also know that I am a huge fan of vehicles with two doors, preferably with some sort of unique technology. Now let's say for the sake of discussion, you and I were to come across an equation that would be an SUV with two less doors, but had some of that unique technology, something like a 48-volt mild hybrid system. Would that make the SUV more interesting? Now, before you and I get too far down the road here, a bit of full disclosure. You and I have already driven the new Defender together. It was the 110, the long wheelbase with the 4 doors. In terms of engine choices, you and I are going to focus on the 3-liter V6 because that's the one we're driving. So this, like the 110, 395 horsepower, 406 pound-feet of torque. But then there's that mild hybrid system, and here we have to understand the difference between this and the system in the Mercedes. I spent a lot more time talking about this in the 110 episode, so go check that out. Now, this system, unlike the Mercedes, has an accessory drive. The integrated starter generator motor is within that accessory drive. In the Mercedes system, the integrated starter generator motor sits between the engine and the transmission and does not have an accessory drive. Now, why is this important to you and I? Well, the concept is less moving parts would equate to a more reliable system over many years of ownership. Now, that's not a question you and I can answer today, but it is a question I am looking forward to answering over the next couple of years with this, the Jaguar, which is the same system, the BMW, as well as the Mercedes. Now we have to press on to the consideration that yes, this is a hybrid, but when I think of a Land Rover, any Land Rover, especially a Defender, I don't think of fuel economy. Well, the US EPA calls this for 17, 22, 19 combined. And because this is an unusual vehicle with a hybrid, I spent more time driving it both on the freeway as well as around town before switching on the camera, and I've done an average of 18 mpg. Not horrible considering this is in the shape of a brick. Then there are performance figures, 0 to 60, 5.7 seconds, VMAX, 129 miles an hour. But then this one, it's fitted with the tow package. So what's the answer there? 8,201 pounds, unbraked, 1,653 pounds. So a bit of a surprise in the weight reduction department. 4,830 pounds, or depending on express your weights and measures, 2,191 kilograms. Now, those numbers don't sound like weight reduction in any way, shape, or measure. However, when compared to the Defender 110, that's 335 pounds less with that. Oh, wait a minute. That gets up and goes pretty well. You may remember when we drove the 110, I felt it performed, at least delivered power like a diesel engine. Here, it still sounds like a diesel engine, but wow. When you take 335 pounds off of a vehicle, it goes, and it goes pretty well. This, I would argue, the weight reduction not only delivers power differently, it almost feels a bit more smoother in power delivery because it's not fighting as much mass. Okay, so as lovely as this difference in power delivery is, does the transmission aid in that at all? Because remember, this is the same 8-speed ZF that we've experienced in BMWs. I would say yes and no. No, in that it doesn't have the same tuning that BMW puts to their ZF 8-speed. It doesn't shift as crisply or as quickly. But on the flip side, I would argue the choice of an 8-speed over, say, a 9-speed or a 10-speed enables this mild hybrid propulsion system not to hunt for a gear, so it stays in the right gear, providing torque when necessary, not trying to get horsepower, which works incredibly well for this size and package of vehicle. Now, on-road driving dynamics, that's something very different from the Defender 110 we have driven. And let's start with the obvious, the length of the vehicle. It's about 17 inches shorter, but where does that 17 inches come from? Well, it comes from the wheelbase, which is also about 17 inches shorter. Now, you would think that would impact the driving dynamics, really the ride quality, because usually when you have a shorter wheelbase vehicle, it has a very choppy ride quality. It usually degrades the ride quality. In this case, you don't feel that at all. Now, kind of a recap here, it's double wishbones in the front, multi-link in the rear. This one is fitted with the optional air ride, so there's better control over it, but you still don't have a choppy ride quality. Now, why is that? Well, first and foremost, yes, it is a shorter vehicle, but it's not exactly a short vehicle. Then there's the weight of the vehicle that helps with the ride quality too. If you were to put this thing on a spectrum, composure down here and compliance up here, I'd say this is closer to compliance. It's not set up like a luxury car, but then again, it's not set up like an SVR or an AMG or anything like that. The biggest thing you would notice is the steering. That's where you get the biggest change. Like for example, let's try a trick here. I don't see anybody coming. Let's do a U-turn, and notice it turns on a dime. That's because of the short wheelbase. So if we're taking stock here, we're getting all the benefits of the short wheelbase in the steering. It's still direct, still has good weight like we learned in the 110. However, that does not come at the cost of ride quality. And think about vehicles like this. The Jeep, we're talking two doors here, or the two-door Bronco, which I have yet to drive. You would think a vehicle like that on a freeway would not be a pleasant experience because it would be bobbing up and down, be a very uncomfortable ride. I have spent a lot of time, I've put 350 miles on this vehicle since I have got it, all highway driving, and I gotta say, it has been incredibly comfortable. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game, Mind the Options game, with today's contestant, something even I would admit is at least in concept closer to the original Defender. This one, the Land Rover Defender 90. Now what you are looking at is a fancy model. It's the first edition, so it's $64,100. Now I do feel it prudent to point out that if it weren't a first edition, it would be $52,300, which admittedly, not a hell of a lot of money when you consider what this thing is. Now we have to get into some of the stuff that's added to this car. First, the color. Ironically, it is exactly the same color as the 110 we drove originally, the Pangea green, which is not bad. However, it has a very uninspired interior choice that Land Rover calls ebony. To you and I, that would be black. Please, not interesting. Let's not do black on the inside. Then we add the first factory fitted option of the tow hitch receiver, $675. Then the off-road tires, $350. Then the only other thing we add is the destination handling, not from the Midlands of the UK, rather Nitra or Nitra, Slovakia. My apologies if I have mispronounced that name, $1,300, which brings us to a total retail price of $66,475. Now, you're looking at this and you're thinking, well, wait a minute. You're sandbagging us like you do in the Kia episodes, and I kind of have. Because the basic car doesn't have some of the really key things that are fitted to this. Like, for example, the Meridian sound system, which is fitted as standard here, that's about an $800 option in a basic car. Then the jump seat. Now, this is something that I find incredibly cool, and all car folks like you and I that want brown diesel station wagons, this is the kind of thing we would want. It is not a bench seat. It's still two bucket seats, and there is a jump seat that sits a little bit higher from the bucket seats that is in between the two seats and replaces the console. It does fold down and kind of mimics a console. Now, I've got a friend of mine that has one of these 110s, an X model that has the console. She's got the fancy wood on the side. It looks nice with the console, but if it were my Defender, I think I would want the jump seats for no other reason than I think it's cool. I tried to get my lady friend to sit next to me when I was driving this thing, and she looked at me like I was nuts. So I think you're putting it in there just because you want to see the jump seat and nothing else. Then another option that is fitted to this car as standard is that folding fabric roof. Again, a basic Defender 90 has a glass roof fitted as standard, but if one wants to trade that glass for fabric, you'd think you'd get some money back. In reality, you wouldn't. The opening is effectively the same size, but they charge you an additional $2,200 for the folding roof option. Can I say it is incredibly cool and makes this car so much more interesting than if it were to have the glass roof. And I am the kind of person that wants some sort of airiness inside of a vehicle, especially one with a black interior. So my suggestion would be paying extra and getting the upgraded leather interior and go with like a saddle with a dark color on the outside. That would really make this thing pop. Which brings us to two other points. One of the running changes going into the 2022 model year, they changed that infotainment screen that started in 2021, and it moves to the larger screen that looks like an iPad that we've seen in some of those Jaguars we've driven as of late. Then there's the customization. You look at the configurator of these things, you can make these into anything you want. you can not only choose the different colors of the inside, meaning the seats and the door panels, you can change the color of the trim on the dash, you can change the trim on the console, you can change the colors of the wheels, the types of the wheels, the trim, as well as the trim color on the outside, push guards, all that kind of stuff, even a ladder, a snorkel, as well as a lockable box off to the side. In other words, you can make these things well north of $100,000. So I am not really your off-road guy. I would argue you want to go to Andre, Nathan, and Roman to do that kind of stuff. However, you and I do need to discuss some of the bits when it relates to off-road in this vehicle. Actually, we are not going to go through this because that is definitely a drop-off. So let's turn around and go back this way. Basically, the off-road modes, there are a couple here, and we've covered this in the 110 episode. It ranges everything from on-road to off-road, and the off-road could be off-road when it comes to snow, it could be a sand mode, or it could be bringing the ride height up as much as possible, kind of like we need here, where we're going through basically a construction site. And a note about that, it adjusts the height of the vehicle, but what's the adjustment? Like, for example, the approach angle changes from 30 to 38 inches, and then the rear it goes from 37.6 to 40, so not as much of a change there. Then, believe it or not, let's say we were to go to wading. If we want to take this thing to Africa and go into rivers, there are rivers in California, we could do that too. 35.4 inches it can wade up to. That's quite a bit when you consider this is not really the Defender that came before it. So in other words, it doesn't have body on frame. This is very much a unibody construction. Underneath, it's a Discovery. Then there's the whole ground clearance thing, and I think that's the big thing here. Granted, this is nothing great here. I'd love to go up to Colorado and play around with this thing. Anyway, ground clearance, 8.5 in on-road mode, 11.5 in this off-road mode, which we're playing with some of these, I'm going to call these speed bumps. This is going to be homes here in Palos Verdes, so you can have one here, one there, and then a couple over here. So we're just going to the different home sites in a vehicle that most of these people probably would buy. Okay, so let's go back to the question we posed at the top of the episode. Does subtracting two doors and grafting on a more high-tech propulsion system make an SUV more interesting? Well, for this very much dyed-in-the-wool Porsche guy, I would say an absolute yes. Much prefer driving the 90 over the longer wheelbase 110. Yeah, it has something to do with the ride quality and the steering, but overall, to me, this is a much more fun and cohesive package, which brings us to the wish list. And here, I don't have much because we get a fabric roof and we get a jump seat and cool stuff like that and all the customization we talked about, which is more compelling, makes this a more interesting vehicle. However, the two things I would ask for, number one, a V8, I believe they've already sorted that out. Number two, that's a bigger one. Look at this. It's begging for a convertible roof. And I gotta believe there would be demand for it, but my guess is the folks at Land Rover, they're probably slowing down on that because they don't know if there will be enough demand for a $100,000 vehicle that would have a mild hybrid system and a folding top. As ridiculous as it sounds, I would love to drive something like that. Anyway, this is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I would once again humbly request your help with the algorithm. And what does that mean? Yes, of course, clicking subscribe and notifications. It only works with the notifications. And yes, clicking like on these episodes. You'd be shocked how few of you actually click like on these episodes. It's something like 2 to 3%, so would love to get that up. And then last but not least, sharing these episodes on your socials with all your friends. Until I see you in the next episode, which will once again be a car, I believe it will be a BMW, and it will be on a track. Until I see you in that episode, or perhaps another one. Bis später.